Welcome to the 2024 State of Sex Education Legislative Look Ahead, hosted by SECUS. We are thrilled to have you here, and we will be getting started in just a couple of minutes. We want to allow people some time to come in the room. So as we wait, please enjoy the music. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 2024 State of Sex Education Legislative Look Ahead. My name is Michelle Slaybaugh, pronouns she, they. I am the Director of Social Impact and Strategic Communications here for SECUS, where we believe that sex ed is a vehicle for social change. We are thrilled to have you with us here today. And before I introduce our speakers, I would like to remind everyone that this is a safe space. And we encourage people to go ahead and drop into the comment section where you're from and who you are here representing. Additionally, if we find that comments have become offensive or hurtful in any way, we do want to go ahead and give you a warning that we will be removing you from the chat. Hey, Lakeisha from California, we're super thrilled to have you here. So like I said before, drop in that comment section where you are coming from and tell us why you're here. Who are you here to support? We want all people, especially young people, to have access to sex education. And we are super thrilled to dive into this astonishing report. And now I am going to pass the mic and get off the screen to our Policy and Advocacy Director, Allison Macklin. And from there, her and our Senior Policy Analyst, Nawal Umar, will be walking you through the insights of what sex ed will look like this year. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Michelle. Well, as Michelle said, my name's Allison Macklin. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Policy and Advocacy Director here at SECUS. Nawal, you want to introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. My name is Nawal Umar. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Senior Policy Analyst at SECUS.
Great. And we're here to talk to you about what's going on around our country at both the state level, at the federal level, what we've seen in 2023, and what we can expect in 2024. So without further ado, let's hop right into it. So for those of you who are new to SECUS or have maybe heard about us but haven't learned too much about us, SECUS envisions an equitable future where all people receive quality sex education, are affirmed in their identities, and have power to make decisions about their own health, pleasure, and well-being. So we do this in a number of ways, and we're the primary organization to only focus on sex education advocacy. And so we do that at the uber local level, supporting school boards and schools who are implementing sex education. We also support those who are trying to advance sex education at the state level through passing different policies and laws. And then we also, of course, work at the federal level. One of the ways that we support our partners in the field and those folks who are on the ground is through our Sex Education Policy Action Council. And as a member of this coalition or this council, all of our partners have an opportunity to learn from one another, to work together, to work with SIECUS in a strategy building component. We support message testing and message development. We help to write policies and think about what the best strategy is in your community. And then also you all help to support us in elevating this important topic at the national level. So if you are not yet a SAPAC member and you are interested in joining us, please do contact us. We have a form online that you can fill out and get involved that way. And then I'll also be posting my email address and Nawal's email address at the end of this presentation. And you can always send us an email as well.
Awesome. Well, getting right into the report. So the 2024 State of Sex Education Legislative Lookahead is a part of an annual series of publications that SIECUS authors that summarizes key legislative highlights, trends, appropriations proceedings at the federal level, any elections that have happened in the previous year, while predicting the upcoming legislative trends and analyzing any pre-filed legislation we have seen prior to the end of the year. So this year's publication specifically covers over 1,000 bills, and it offers a detailed view of the legislative landscape in 2023 and the impact that it has on sex education, access to sexual health services, and LGBTQIA rights. Next slide, please. Alrighty, so getting into it, talking about high-level data points. So last year, SIECUS tracked over 1,000 bills, and out of these bills, about 62% of them were bills that were restrictive or infringing on the rights of young people, as well as we saw an over 50% increase in the bills that we tracked from last year's session from 2022 to 2023. And we also saw an 800% increase in anti-sex education bills that were passed into law comparative to 2022. Next slide. And so 12% of these regressive bills that I mentioned have already passed in 2023 compared to 9.7% in 2022. And what this means is that our opposition, or also known as the regressive minority, understands what strategies will be the most successful and most likely to pass into law. Next slide. And so at the end of last year, SIECUS had tracked 112 bills that had been passed into law. And in fact, of these 112 bills, 8 were explicitly laws that will impact or restrict sex education. So it's talking about what bills that we track. SIECUS tracks more than just sex education. In fact, of all the bills that we tracked in 2023, only 164 were exclusively about sex education. So SIECUS tracks all bills that have the potential to impact honest, inclusive education, school environments, and healthcare for young people. So this includes bills that are trying to advance or restrict LGBTQI youth rights, restrict or improve access to family planning services, abortion care, book bans, curriculum censorship, and so much more. And this is because, and Allison will touch on this later, with the rise of the far-right movement in the past decade, the opposition for sex education has also been primarily the main opposition to other intersecting topics within sexual and reproductive freedoms. And beyond that, the opposition has tried to tie in these interrelated movements together through the use of so-called parental rights bills or monster omnibus bills, which we'll also kind of talk about in a bit. And so because of that, SIECUS tracks all these interrelated attacks on the rights of young people, both within the school system, but also the healthcare system and outside of that. Next slide. So talking about our top legislative trends of 2023, next slide. We have it divided into the good, the bad, the ugly. So starting with the good, to start off positive, we have assault and abuse prevention bills. So these are bills that we saw in 2023 that would seek to instruct students on dating violence, sexual violence, abuse, healthy relationships, whether by sex education curriculum that exists or in other classroom curricula or in health education classroom curricula. And in fact, we saw 6 bills that were enacted in 5 states towards this topic. And then we have eliminating period poverty or menstrual equity bills. So these are bills that increase access to free period products in schools and or include menstruation education in schools, either by having it in sex education or otherwise. And we saw 5 bills enacted in 5 states towards eliminating period poverty. And then we have protecting LGBTQIA youth. So even in the year, in the midst of attacks on LGBTQIA youth, we saw at least 11 states that enacted bills that would establish protections for LGBTQ youth. So these are things like having inclusive curriculums dedicated to them, having inclusive facilities or other resources within the school system, as well as improving access to gender-affirming care, etc. Moving on into the bad and the ugly. So starting off with restricting early childhood sex education. So this is a topic that we saw last year, where there were bills that would establish restrictions for sex ed taught either in kindergarten through 3rd grade, kindergarten through 5th grade, or even K through 8. And in fact, 4 of the sex education bills I had previously mentioned that were enacted into law established these restrictions. Moving on to parental rights, which I also touched on earlier, these are bills that, under the guise of improving or empowering parents, truly actually allow for parental oversight in the education system, school censorship, or any other efforts to destabilize the public education system as a whole. And oftentimes they also tie in things like restricting sex ed or restricting LGBT students or harming them. And over 20 of these bills were enacted into law this past year, unfortunately. And we also observed an over 70% increase of these kinds of bills from 2022 to 2023. And then we also saw many attacks on transgender youth. In fact, 47 of the bills that were enacted, or there were 47 bills enacted in over 20 states, with several states enacting many kinds of anti-transgender bills. And these states include states like Arkansas. And these bills are bills that would restrict anything from gender-affirming care, enlist school sports bans, bathroom bans, or even allow for misgendering within the school environment. Next slide. Awesome. So then we have forced outing and don't say gay bills. So very similar to the don't say gay bill from 2022 in Florida. These are bills that would establish procedures that would restrict any discussion of sexual orientation or gender identity in schools and or pressurize school staff to out LGBTQI students. And unfortunately, SECA's tracked at least 46 newly enacted laws in 22 states that would make classrooms by and large, unsafe and discriminatory spaces for LGBTQ young people. And specifically, in terms of forced outing clauses, 12 bills were enacted that would require or pressurize school staff to out LGBTQ students or prohibit them from addressing them with correct names or pronouns. And then lastly, we have sexually explicit book bans. And so these are bills that attempt to censor both school libraries and instructional materials based on loosely derived terms such as sexually explicit, obscene, or harmful to minors. And this could be based on whatever they want to define it as, but oftentimes it's used to restrict sex education, healthy relationships, or even healthy same-sex relationships. And 12 bills were enacted instituting these book bans or allowing for censorship of these materials. Texas alone introduced 14 bills of this nature, of which one did unfortunately pass. Next slide. Awesome. So what else is covered in the report that I haven't touched on so far? So the legislative Lookahead report features, the full report features discussion on the Real Education and Access for Healthy Youth Act, which is also known as REA. And it also talks about other federal funding streams that are dedicated towards adolescent sexual health programming. So these are things like PrEP, TPP, DASH funding, and any updates on where we are with the appropriations process up until January 2024. It also highlights some key victories and losses that we saw with elections at the federal, state, local, and even school board level, and what we can, based on that, predict and prepare for this upcoming presidential year. And then lastly, this report gives guidance and a list of resources that SECAS has for advocates and organizations to use and utilize during this year's legislative sessions. So if you would like more information, please read our full report that is now available on our website, www.secas.org.
Great. Thanks so much, Noel. So when 2023 closed, at the start of 2024, an overview and snapshot of what the current state of sex ed is in the United States. Excuse me. 29 states and the District of Columbia require sex education. That's just kind of a broad law. Those are broad laws there. And then 38 states, and some of those are the 29 states, also require HIV education. What's important to know is that of those 29 states who are saying that sex education must be taught, 16 of them say that it has to be abstinence only till marriage education. This has also been rebranded as sexual risk avoidance education. 9 states have policies that include affirming sexual orientation instruction on LGBTQ youth identities or discussion of sexual health for LGBTQ. So that's great. However, on the flip side of that, there are 6 states that explicitly require instruction that discriminates against LGBTQ young people. And then there's 5 states who have laws requiring what we call comprehensive sex education, also known as and that's the sex education that we're advocating for, but we also can call it an alignment with the national sex education standards. And so of those, 3 states require sex education to be taught in all schools. And then two of those states actually have an if-then. So if sex education is being taught, then it must be comprehensive. So we know what happened in 2023. What can we look forward to in 2024? Well, federal law doesn't have a lot of jurisdiction over education policy. There's the 10th Amendment, or the 10th Amendment to the Constitution really regulated that lawmaking to the states. So that's why we see a lot of state policies and a lot of localized fights when it comes to different education. We do have broad law that the federal government has put forward, and that is basically, it was called the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965, or ESSA, which was renewed again then in 2015 as the Every Student Succeeds Act. That federal policy is the guiding policy from the feds that says young people have to have access to education. They have to have access to education that's free from discrimination, that you cannot be segregated, that everyone has to have the same resources, that they have to have safe places to learn, and so on. Now, with the 10th Amendment, how that actually happens is then boiled down to the states. So like I said, that's where we're seeing these battlegrounds happening, is at the state level and even so much at the local school board level. So some trends that we're seeing, and we thought we saw these coming up in 2023 with pre-files, and they're just hitting hard and hitting home, are the first one I want to talk about is online censorship. So these are bills that they are under the guise of online safety. And I want to be very clear that SECAS believes that young people should be safe and should have some guardrails when it comes to internet use and social media use. However, as the bills that are being run right now, how they would impact people is that they're very loosely written. So when they're calling out things that are obscene, that is really at the, that's one person's opinion of what would be obscene. So a lot of the way that these bills are currently written and they're like age verification laws, things like that. They would prevent young people from being able to access age appropriate, medically accurate information. There's a lot of really, really great websites out there that support young people, that help LGBTQ people, that provide information, and these are open to censorship when we see these types of bills because of they're at the discretion of the state and the lawmakers. We also, as Nawal mentioned, saw a lot of a lot of book bans last year. And there was a huge, huge uproar around the book bans. And the regressive minority heard that and thought, okay, well, let's change our tactic a little bit. So this year the book ban is really around book rating requirements. So these are a little bit softer versions of book bans, but they still require school libraries to mark books as sexually explicit or require parental disclosure. So for example, someone would be notified if their student took out a certain book out of the library. So again, this is a type of policing of students, and we're not leaving the library and the management of the materials in the library to the experts. Librarians have guidelines. They have systems that they use to make sure that, materials are segmented in a certain way. And we need to trust the experts to be able to do their jobs. It's not up for lawmakers to decide that. We're also seeing a number of places where this is typically under the guise of infringing upon LGBTQ rights, but the pursuit of civil lawsuits. So really saying that, okay, so if this teacher misgenders a student, for example, or does something in a certain, that the parents find offensive, it's allowing the parents to sue the teacher, to sue the school district. And we know that this is a tactic to simply defund public education. School districts, teachers don't make a lot of money. School districts don't have a lot of money. So it's really a nefarious attack on public education. A couple other things that we have that we're watching. One is called the Baby Olivia Act in a couple states, and in some states it's just simply called an ultrasound, or an ultrasound law. And this is asking that an ultrasound, or mandating, I should say, an ultrasound be viewed during sex education. So this is a bill that's being put forth by Live Action. Live Action has been called out in several of these bills, specifically that their video must be used. And if you're not familiar with Live Action is an organization that lies to people, that provides misinformation and junk science. It is notoriously known as of spreading misinformation. It's been banned. This organization's been banned from several social media outlets because of the amount of misinformation that they put forth. And their political agenda is really an anti-abortion brainwashing is what they're trying to basically do, because they want to show these bills to really young kids. So I want to be clear that when we look at what is best for sex education, watching an ultrasound is nowhere a part of that. And so for them to come in and say, oh, well, yes, we want sex education, and we also think this ultrasound is great. They're trying to steer our movement and really co-opt it to push forth their anti-abortion propaganda. Other trends that we're seeing are things that are anti-consent bills. So these are bills that are forbidding the teaching of concepts of consent. So consent is taught because, you consent to many different things. As a young person, you would consent to whether or not you wanted to share a toy with someone. As an older person, that might change and turn into sexual activity. But the challenge is that you have to be able to teach the concepts of consent in order to reduce intimate partner violence and in order to ensure that we are reducing sexual assault. So this idea that teaching consent is somehow hurtful for young people is completely misguided. And then we're continuing to see the same attacks that we've seen over and over and over again. So forced outing clauses, restricting the ability for GSAs to exist at schools, extending up SOGI bans. So these types of things, again, are an attempt to squash a certain population and to prevent their ability to become, to grow into the healthy and the adults that they need to be. So we do also see a lot of really great opportunities. We have seen more sex ed bills filed this year than in years past. And these sex ed bills are really proactive. They are inclusive. They're working to ensure that young people have access to the information that they need at the times in their life that is appropriate. So we're seeing a bunch of those, which is great. We're also seeing some protecting books. So actually books saying that you cannot ban books. We have to leave the curation of libraries to the people who are actually experts in their field. We are, despite the consent bills, we are seeing some really great sexual assault prevention bills around preparing teachers, for example, making sure that they know how to teach in an inclusive way, these types of curricula. And then LGBTQIA protections, so fighting against these conversion therapy bans, for example. And then, of course, protecting data collection. So really recognizing that, we're in a dangerous spot when we are collecting certain types of information from certain people and acting as a gatekeeper to that information. And so really making sure that all people are able to access and use the internet in the way that it was designed to be. So with that, I want to open it up for questions. Hopefully people can put their questions in the comments. And Michelle, I'm not sure if you're going to call on questions or how that would work.
We are here as the moderators to support in the questions that pop up. And I was just going to encourage people to drop those questions in the comments, and we will be sure that both Allison and Nawal see them. So if you've got questions, drop them in and we will get to them. So one of the questions right now is, what is the stated political goal of the anti-consent bills?
So the stated political goal is really the opposition. That's a great question. The opposition has their goal is really around ensuring and breaking down and utilizing the system that we currently have set up, with the federal providing very loose guidance, and then the states being able to put in their more specific guidance. Their goal is really to look at that and try to erode rights, to take away access to education. And, for me, and probably for you, the purpose behind blocking consent education is just another way to limit access to information. I want to call out that we had the Dobbs decision a couple years ago, where the federal right to abortion was taken away and it was pushed down to the states. And we know that the opposition saw that as the floodgates opening, where now anything that's available at the federal level is up for debate at the state level. So we're seeing a lot of states where they're saying, okay, just because there's the Constitution where it says there's separation of church and state, for example, that doesn't mean that we can't try to erode that right at the state level. So that's where we're seeing a lot of these types of bills coming in, where their goal is really to challenge the existing Constitution and the democracy of the United States. So a consent bill, I have never in my 20 plus years in this field ever had someone who, has a different opinion about sex education say to me, consent is bad, don't teach it. I think we can all and have historically agreed that preventing sexual violence, preventing intimate partner violence is something we can all agree on. So the fact that there is an attempt to erode state law in that way is very nefarious.
Yeah, Allison, great point on that. I did just see someone ask where people can access some of these specific bills. Please go to www.secus.org and click on our state profiles. Each state will have a comprehensive readout of the bills that we have currently been tracking. Another question that we got, Allison, was what is the initiative and or tactics for messaging for promotion good policy, fighting bad policy in red and purple states? And so I'm going to let you think about that one, but we had one that came right before that I think is also interconnected. What is the traction around educating parents around the sexual health education and the curriculum?
So the great thing about sex ed is that when we have done lots and lots of research, not just us, independent pollers have done this research, and we know that overwhelmingly parents and basically Americans at large, regardless of political affiliation, they want sex education. And they want sex education according to the national sex education standards. When we break those standards down and talk about what's being taught at what age level, we know that people overwhelmingly support it, believe it belongs in schools, and so we have the overwhelming majority of people on our side. So I think that speaks a little bit to the messaging component, because we know that is something overwhelmingly, just like overwhelmingly people do not support book bans. They find it very undemocratic. So again, we have to recognize that this is a really small extremist group of Christian nationalists who have a certain ideology. They are working to put their Christian ideology into our laws and governance, which that is not how the United States of America was set up. It's very clear in our Constitution that there is a separation of church and state, and that laws are there to protect our citizens. And as our country has evolved through its turbulent history and offensive history, doing better has been the goal. So, like I mentioned, with the Civil Rights Act and the ESSA Act, those are things that the government is doing has done to protect people from segregation, to protect them from stigma, to ensure that everyone has access to information. So I think when we go back to messaging, we have to go back to those values that we all as Americans share. And so, of course, there's that one little fragment of population. Those people do not share that value. They have their own values. They have their own desires of what they want to see happen. Again, that is a tiny, tiny percentage of the population. They're really, really loud and really, really aggressive, but they are not the majority of Americans. If you talk to your neighbors, if you talk to people in the grocery store, the gas station, wherever you are out in public, there is a value around keeping people safe, making sure that our classrooms are inclusive, and making sure that people have access to education. And so when we come back to those fundamental things, we can then see how sex education for social change is the platform for how we can make inclusive classrooms, how we can ensure that there is an opportunity for every child, regardless of what pronouns they use, how they dress, how they're showing up, to be able to access the information that they have the right to. Same with the internet, same with the library, right? Like these are systems that we have in place where, we as a country have said, we value this and we want to, we value it and we're going to uphold it. So what we really need to go back to are these fundamental cornerstones of our democracy, and recognizing that this is, again, when it was written, there was a lot of different things going on in history that we can, verify we're not good and we're not correct. And yet the system that we have is currently under attack. And so we have to go back to the values that I think we've evolved the Constitution into representing in 2024.
Great answer. And I would just like to add to that, Anika, great question with how do we become aware of these bill proposals? What we need you to do is we need you to be sure that you have signed up for our listserv. And when bills come out between our policy team and our communications team, we send out action alerts informing you on what the bill is that is drawing us alarm, as well as provide opportunity for you to, in just a couple clicks, sign and send a letter to your member of Congress to let them know that you really care about these issues and that your voice needs to be heard. In addition to that, I'd like to remind everybody that May is Sex Ed for All Month. And we want you to participate. We will have toolkits that can help you with talking points. In addition to that, following this webinar, all of you who registered will be getting an email, and we will include the ultrasound bill or baby Olivia bill toolkit that provides you with talking points. It provides you with graphics on how you can share this content out on your social media, and even provides you with some emails so you can send to your friends and family, your network, to get them to sign the petition to raise the alarm on the ultrasound bills. And we do this with every bill that we are really concerned about. So what we need people to do is, in your respective states, make sure you're signed up, and please make sure you keep an eye out for those action alerts, because your voice matters. And as constituents of the state, you must demand that you live in a state that you are receiving the access to care, access to information, and opportunity to have your voice heard. Somebody else just recently asked, and we're getting a lot of questions. So if we do not get to all of them, we will make sure that we send some of this information as a follow-up. But one person says, who are the most supportive members of sex education in Congress? Shout out Cory Booker, just in case you want to support them. But Allison, there are other members of Congress, and could you give us like a shout out to who some of those members who have been really Jayapal, that comes up in my head, but you would know them.
Yeah, so Pramila Jayapal for sure, Hirono, Barbara Lee. There's a number of really great advocates that have supported us and support our efforts. And we can post, you can actually find a list of the co-sponsors for RHEA on our website.
Great. And Catherine, just want to let you know, great question. You're curious if SIECUS has any plans toward enacting federal legislation aimed at requiring appropriate sex education in all states. Yes, that would be the Real Education and Access for Healthy Youth Act, which was introduced originally in 2021. But let me spill the tea here. It is not a year that we're going to see this reintroduced because of the election. But that does not mean that we do not continue to amplify our voices, write our members of Congress, which again In the follow-up email, you will have an opportunity to tell your member of Congress to support Rhea.
And I would just add to that, this is an election year. And so you have to get to know the candidates that are running at not only the federal level, but also at the uber local level. So who are the candidates at your school boards? Because we need to make sure that we're electing people who are supportive of sex education, are supportive of inclusive classrooms, who represent the values of the majority of Americans.
So absolutely, Allison. We did also get some questions around, is there any movement on litigation to some of these states with some of these repressive bills? And can you speak to where we're at in the process of maybe filing some, litigation around? And I don't think it's just about states that have these regressive bills. It's also, and this is important, states that actually do have positive sex education laws, but are not implementing it. So I'm going to give a shout out to our next state profile rollout that'll come in the next month. And that will have a report card for each state and how they are enacting sex ed. But Allison, what type of litigation are we looking at, if any movement is happening at all?
Yeah, so unfortunately, and I think, we've seen this play out recently in the media, is that litigation takes a really long time. And you have to have someone who is willing to press charges. So again, we are talking about individuals where these people are targeted. They're extremely marginalized, and that may not be the type of attention that they want. So to find, a plaintiff, to find someone who is actually willing to file a lawsuit, it can be a challenge in of itself. However, there are lawsuits happening in different states. We are not a legal organization, so we are not directly involved in any of those legal activities. But the desire, and this is really the purpose of why a lot of these oppositional bills are being filed in the way that they are, and challenging the federal government's, the rule of democracy, essentially, is that the goal is that these will go up the chain and kind of get all the way up to the Supreme Court, where we know that the Supreme Court is not in favor of reproductive rights. The Supreme Court is overwhelmingly supportive of states' rights, given the Dobbs decision. And so, again, that floodgate has opened. And whether that's going to be a favorable strategy on either side is yet to be seen.
Yeah, that's really a great point. KJ Hawk asked, in my area, I'm seeing well-meaning progressive parents who are on board with censorship legislation because they're believing the messages of we must protect our children online. What sort of efforts are being made to inform voters about these laws? And before I throw it to Allison, I do want to say to you, KJ, please look up sex ed voter.
Educate
us. Yes, educate us. But Allison, aside from educate us, what sort of efforts are being made to inform voters about these laws?
Yeah, so you hit the nail on the head there, right? Like, I'm a parent. I want my children to be safe when they go online as well. And I think what a lot of parents don't realize is those systems actually already exist. Apple has systems, Google has systems. There's a lot of free services out there that parents can implement to help restrict what young people are accessing online. So that's kind of the first thing. There's definitely an opportunity in the private sphere to be able to do that. And then we have, the corporations like Meta, for example, who they have put in different systems. I'm not saying they're the best, but they are also putting in different systems where there is some age verification opportunities. I think what I would say to parents is that we all want our young people to be safe. We do not want them to be, to see the dark web. We don't want them to be exposed to anything before they are developmentally and age appropriate. And so what I think is really important is to help figure out who's behind these bills. And when we look at who's behind these bills, we can draw, I feel like it's like something that you would see in a Spider-Man movie where you see the web connecting different pictures together. We can see that they are all attempts to censor and attempts to harm our most marginalized community members. And so when we take away the fear that we all have for our young people's safety, and we look at the facts of how these types of bills can impact, then we realize that, oh, yes, the intention is good, but the impact is really going to be harmful. And it's not going to be harmful for just young people. It's going to be harmful for adults as well. So when you start to get into this, data collection piece of, recording driver's license information, for example, or what have you, you're getting into a whole nother, level of tracking of individuals. You're getting into a whole nother level of data collection on individuals. And honestly, I think we all recognize that there's a problem, and there are some great pieces of legislation out there. But right now, the ones that are getting the attention, they're getting the attention because they're preying on people's fear.
It's always the fear mongering, right? Allison, I think there is an interest from some people on LinkedIn. Lee, if you're still with us, wondering if you could just give us a quick example of a state that put forth an anti-consent bill. She's interested in reading up more on this.
Yes, I don't have my legislative tracker up right now. So if you want to go on to another question, then I can pull that up and I can find a couple states for you.
Absolutely. So I think that while Allison pulls that up, I do want to call out that there are a number of parents that are being misled when it comes to sex education in schools. And SECUS, along with Advocates for Youth, Planned Parenthood Federation of America, and the whole SEC are really working diligently to be able to best communicate that the national sex ed standards are scaffolded. So what we teach in high school sex education is not what you would get in an elementary level sex education. What you will see in an elementary level sex education class really are foundational tools of recognizing healthy relationships. And at that age, it's friendships. But it's important for young people to understand that, as Allison mentioned earlier in this webinar, bodily autonomy and consent at a young age might be about toys or might be about a pencil on a desk. But it is important that we continue to reiterate how young people express consent. And so when they get older and it may become something more along the lines of sexual activity, they already have the skill set. And I say that as a sex educator of over 15 years, young people need the opportunity to practice the language, to practice being able to articulate their likes, their dislikes, and when people have crossed boundaries. Additionally, it helps them to identify healthy friendships, as well as starts to open, in elementary school, an understanding around their body parts, bodily autonomy, and how to communicate if, God forbid, something did happen. It's really important for them to be able to articulate that in those types of worst case scenarios. Let's see what else. Okay, so someone asked, what does it mean for young children and adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities when age and grade level do not always align? May I say something, Allison? As a former educator, we focus on, especially when you are trained and you understand the national sex ed standards, you are trained to know and to be able to assess when a young person can and should learn what. So if you are working with someone that has intellectual delays, you would be able to go to the National Sex Ed Standard, and there is a chart in there that shows you by each grade what should be learned. I love to encourage people to read the National Sex Ed Standards. It is a pretty large document, but even if you just to go and look at the chart, it can give you a really solid roadmap of what needs to be taught when. And if you are somebody that is working with developmentally delayed adults or children, you could use that as a guide to shape the conversation and to deliver to them the most appropriate material that they can understand. So, Allison, back to the anti-consent bills. Can you give us an update on that?
Yeah, the one that's moving right now that we're particularly concerned about is in Utah. We've got over 3,000 bills that we're currently tracking right now. So sorry, I'm trying to filter through them. But the Utah one is definitely is problematic.
Sorry. And Allison, if you wanted to follow up on the developmentally delayed question, what your recommendation might be.
Oh, sure. I mean, there are a number of curriculum out there that have been designed for people with developmental challenges. So there are curriculum specifically developed and a number of really great experts who are experts in not only sex education and child development, but also special education teachers. So this is something that, there's a lot of thought and a lot of expertise going into creating a curriculum that is appropriate for different types of learners.
Thank you so much, Allison. I just want to say, if anybody has any other questions, we have about 8 minutes left. And I want to thank everybody who has stayed on this call and really provided us with great questions in the chat. If you have any other ones, please be sure to drop those in there. Allison, as we look to this election year, you did call out it is important for people to get involved, but can you kind of bookend us with what do we need to do right now in preparation for the upcoming election and the fact that this will not be a year that Rhea will be introduced? What advice would you give?
Well, first of all, I would make sure that you check your voter registration, make sure you are registered to vote, that your addresses match up, and that there's no barriers to being able to get your voice heard in that capacity. But I think also to look at what's going on in your school districts, what is going on in your local state legislature, and recognizing that, while certain opposition has been able to get a foothold in a lot of these systems and structures that exist, we can fight back, and we can fight back with what we know the majority of Americans want. So we have to continue and stay loud. We have to continue to raise our voices, make ourselves heard, and really ensure that sex education and that the concepts that we all stand for of safe, inclusive classrooms, that is not up on the ballot, that is not something that we as Americans are willing to sacrifice. I think, this is a critical year, more critical than any other. I think you're muted, Michelle.
You think I know this by now. Jason said, we learned that Utah bill edits the parental notification topics for sex education, but does not change the underlying topics that can or cannot be taught. It all depends on the code that it is edited. And the bill is making cosmetic changes to the code, redefining the parental notification checklist. Wondering if you have any comments to that or thoughts, Allison?
I'm sorry, I missed the first part of that. What state it's in?
Utah.
Oh, there.
So I'm wondering if you have any follow-up to Jason's statement. Thank you, Jason, by the way.
Not at this time, no.
Okay, well, I am super excited.
The only thing I would say, sorry, I'm just trying to process and read on the fly. So the only thing I would say about parental notification is that they are not bills that are necessary. So in the public education system, we have a system where parents are already notified about what is being taught. This is something that is public. So parents have the right to access any type of syllabus. Parents have the right to meet with teachers and know what the course curriculum looks like. So any type of parental rights type of bill is a false, it's like a false assurance, I think. And I think, of course, parents have the right to know what's being taught in their classroom, but also parents have the right to, they don't necessarily have the right to pick and choose what kind of history is being taught or other types of subject matter. By participating in a public education system, there is parents can opt their child out of that education system at any point. They don't even have to go to a private school. They can do homeschooling. There are other opportunities to be involved. And so parental notification bills are, this idea that parents have all the rights and can control what is happening in their schools. That's not necessarily their job. Whose job it is the educators, the people who have gone to school, who know what's appropriate for different ages and what should be taught. People who have spent their careers teaching, their careers in public school education systems. And so if a parent is really that upset or really feels that they need to have that much control, then the public education system may not be the best place for their child. And that's totally your right. As an American citizen, you can absolutely take your child out of that system and put them in a different type of education system. But those parents don't get to determine what my child learns or what your child learns. So my right as a parent does not supersede any other parent's rights. And I think you also need to recognize that students have rights as well. So students are autonomous human beings. They have every right to access information. They have every right to think critically. They have every right to get facts and research and information in a way that's appropriate. So when we put in these types of limitations, like a parental rights type of bill, really what we're saying is that parents' rights supersede anybody else's, those parents and their rights supersede anybody else's rights. And that's simply not true.
Yeah, that's amazing. I do see, we're going to close out with one last question. I do see that there still is some confusion around the anti-consent bills, but we will be sure, as stated before, to provide greater depth of information in the webinar follow-up email. So if you did register for this webinar, you will get an email, and I have taken a note, and we will make sure that we call out some of these parental or the anti-consent bills. Last question we're going to take because we're almost done here is, and this could be a quiz question. What are the 3 states with the most comprehensive programs?
The most comprehensive? Oh gosh. California. Yep. Oh my God, it does feel like a quiz.
No, it's California, Washington, I believe. Yes. And California, Washington, I want to say maybe, nope, can't say that one. I was going to say Illinois or maybe Oregon, but
Oregon. And then Illinois and Colorado have the if-then laws.
Yeah. So it's Washington, Oregon, and California. But let's caveat with, it does not necessarily mean just because the law is on the book that the actual programs are being implemented. So that will all be highlighted in the state profiles report cards that we are set to publish next month. So we are super, super excited. There's so much more to come. We deeply, deeply appreciate everybody who has participated today, and we really want to thank you. And we look forward to seeing you on our next webinar. So make sure you are signed up to be on our listserv. And Allison, do you have any last words?
Please do take a look at the report and look at the resources on the website. Get active.
Yes, and remember this 2024 legislative look ahead. It's not just a report, it's a movement. So have a great day, everybody. For SECA, Sex Ed for Social Change, I'm Michelle Slaybaugh, and we will see you next time. Thanks. Bye-bye.